Good morning, everybody. What a pleasure to be here. It's for me a special pleasure to be here in Ottawa. For those of you who I haven't met yet, I spent the last 7 years here, and I just recently had hit the jackpot, got to move back home to BC, and I'm so excited to get to share the story of what we're doing in BC with you today. So just get us started. I'm curious, how many of you work in the public sector? Holy, okay, everybody, great. How many of you work for the Government of Canada? Okay, pretty much everybody. Now, I'm also very curious, how many of you are from somewhere other than Ottawa and you moved here to work for the Government of Canada? So maybe half. That's my story. And I'm really excited about getting to be back home. And I want to make a little bit of a point about how thinking about the margins of our country is so critical for including everybody. And when we do work on digital government, it's critical that we build for folks who live on the margin. So I want to do a couple of things today. First of all, for those of you who are perhaps from the international crowd, I'm realizing it's totally irrelevant that I'm telling you where BC is. But okay, in case there are any international visitors, that's where BC is. I want to do two things for our conversation today. The first is I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion about what we're up to in BC, give you some insight into our approach to digital government. And I'm mostly excited to do this because I want us to collaborate more. This federation is too decentralized and too much jurisdiction is sitting with the provinces for us to afford not to collaborate. So I'm really excited to tell you a little bit about that. But because I am also the first speaker today, we'll do a little bit of a level set on what's digital government. I'm sure that this is going to be extremely old hat for a lot of you, but here we go. So, technology has changed our world. It absolutely has. Computers have never been faster or cheaper. We've got leaders who are on Instagram and Twitter, and they are doing it live, right? And so with that, with this immediacy, we've got the promise of services for our citizens that are more aligned with their needs than they've ever been before, right? We've got this idea that we can tailor our services to the individual needs of our people and our communities. That's the promise of digital government. And yet, in spite of this immediacy, our societies have never been so polarized, right? We look at the Edelman Trust Barometer, you look at whatever data source, we've got a real gap in our ability to meet citizen expectations, right? In a world where you can skip the dishes with a couple of clicks, you can hail a ride, I mean, not in BC, but everywhere else, you can hail a ride with a couple of clicks. Citizens have come to expect incredibly tailored, immediate services that are available anywhere, anytime. And governments are consistently failing to provide reliable access to simple websites, right? So we've got a bit of a disconnect in terms of ability to deliver and citizen expectations. What that means is that there's a new imperative around digital government. What that means is that there's an opportunity for governments like the government of BC, like the government of Canada, to more ambitiously, more aggressively adopt modern tools. So tools from the internet era, from the fourth industrial revolution, to serve citizens, to deliver services that warrant the trust of our citizens. And I think that trust piece is absolutely critical. I want to tell you a little bit about the steps that we're taking in BC to try to get to that place of excellent service delivery, anytime, anywhere, meeting the needs and expectations of our citizens. And then I'll pivot a little bit to our path forward. So the first one that I want to tell you about is our lab. Is Room in here? No? All right, well, the executive director for the lab is going to be around. I hope that you chat with him. Fantastic person. The lab, it's a physical place in Victoria. It's right downtown on Douglas Street for those of you who know Victoria. It's a very creative spot, and we use it to try to deal with wicked problems within our government. So at any given time, there are up to 12 teams working away in the lab. Right now, today, there are teams that are working on conservation, environmental assessments, empowering patients through access to their own healthcare information, responding to climate change. Essentially what happens is ministries will come to us, to my ministry, it's a central agency, and come in and say, all right, we've got a bit of a problem. We've got about a year waiting list to get into the lab, and they have to show up with two things. Well, three, really. A clearly defined business problem, recognition from senior leadership that it is a business problem, and some cash. They have to show up with some money. We use that money to procure teams. tech teams that are then embedded with the public officials, and they work together to deal with these problems physically in the lab. I'll give you a specific example of one of the lab projects that really resonated with me. So last year, Aaron came into the lab. He's a mine inspector from the Ministry of Energy, Mines and Petroleum Resources. And he came in saying, I'm not sure that I have the tools or the knowledge or the ability to take a risk-based approach to mine inspections. So he's flying around the province, going and inspecting mines, trying to keep our people safe, and he doesn't have all of the knowledge or the information at his fingertips to be able to say, this is a high-risk mine. So he's kind of going off willy-nilly, and he comes into the lab saying, surely there is a more evidence-based approach to mine inspection that I could take. We agreed. His senior management agreed. So in he came as the product owner, and we're fully agile in the lab. We procured a team, so great technologists, external devs, and they sit with Aaron and a few other of his teammates, and together they built the Mine's digital service. And you see a screenshot of what that looks like today. Essentially, it's a dashboard of all information that's relevant to mine inspections. So he, as an inspector, is able to go in there and say, hey, that mine that failed a bunch of inspections over the past few years, that seems like a priority one to go investigate, right? And so he's able to take more of an evidence-based approach to mine inspections and ultimately keep our province safer. Another example of the kind of thing that's coming out of the lab, many of you have likely heard of the BC Services Card. So in BC, we've got about 5 million people. So far, 4.6 million of them have this card. And BC was the first jurisdiction in North America to successfully unify our health card and our driver's license. So this is your identity credential. That was a lot of work, and the plumbing behind that is such that it's highly scalable. So we can be onboarding new services to the services card. We've got a little app for you to verify your digital version of this, and it's really fun. Like once you've got your services card, you go and you can wave to a human, and we do the identity verification through video chat. And so you've now got a digital identity piece that's very, very helpful. This makes it easier for government to authenticate people's identity and ultimately to serve them, which is pretty critical. All those different things that we're doing out of the lab, supporting these service delivery mechanisms. We've also changed the processes to be able to deliver on these things in an agile manner. So I mentioned that when we bring a team into the lab, we'll procure a tech team to sit with the product owners. And we use mechanisms like Code With Us and Sprint With Us, which are two of our big procurement tools. Sprint With Us is essentially a tool for procuring an entire team. And we've got a number of these procurements on this. We've got a $400,000 procurement on the street right now. And the really cool thing about this is the day that bids close, from the day that the bids close to the day that we award the contract, it's down to 17 days. So we're trying really hard to try to have those agile procurement tools that are built into our business processes. The services card is one that, for me, is absolutely critical because it's the basis of ongoing work around digital identity. This is just us getting started, though. We have recognized as a government that to collaborate in the digital age, we need to have trust, right? We need to trust that the businesses or the people that we're engaging with really are who they say they are. So normally, when we're trying to build trust in digital platforms, we use logins, we use usernames, passwords, that sort of thing. But one, it can be very complicated to keep track of. And two, in an age of surveillance capitalism, wherein so many people are hungry for our data, it doesn't necessarily make sense to put all your trust in third parties. I mean, sometimes they're trusted third parties, but often, it's kind of dicey. So what we're doing in BC is we're investing in a distributed ledger to establish our org book, our Verified Organizations Network. And our first use case for the org book is our corporate registry. So today, our corporate registry is blockchain-based, so a distributed ledger, and we're using cryptographic codes, hashes, to ensure that nobody can unduly manipulate the information on the blockchain, so it's all good and secure. And essentially, what this does is it means that businesses can now go and make changes to their own information on the blockchain, right? And so we're putting that information in the hands of the users and putting safeguards in place so that there isn't any undue manipulation. right? And so it's a pretty exciting use case. Just last week, we onboarded all of the cannabis retail facilities to the org book. And so now if you're going, if you want to buy pot and you want to make sure that it's an actually accredited place, you can go onto the org book and you can see the record that it has been accredited as a retail facility on the blockchain. So you can have a high degree of confidence that the services that you're accessing have gone through an appropriate regulatory process. Right? And so that's the kind of potential that you have. Similarly, you can imagine a version of the world where, and this is something we're building right now, where the lawyer of record for a corporate entity goes in there, has been part of a board meeting, sees that there's been a change in directors, can go and make that change as the lawyer of record on the blockchain, and you have a fully auditable trail of when those changes were made, and it's entirely self-serve, right? So that's the kind of thing that we're building out through the Verified Organizations Network. It's pretty exciting stuff. I think also it's worth thinking about not just the plumbing that informs all of our work around digital government, and there's certainly a lot more progress that we need to make, but it's also a question, I think, of thinking through almost more basic processes, thinking about things like service design. And I want to give you a couple examples of times where we did think through and took a design thinking process, and it went really well. One of the first stories that I want to start with that really resonated with me when I was onboarding myself into this role in BC was around forest fires. So last summer of 2018, BC was on fire. So 1.4 million hectares were burning. It was absolutely massive. Like we had to evacuate thousands and thousands of people. About 5,000 people were mobilized to fight the forest fires. $615 million expended in fighting these forest fires. It was absolutely devastating. Massive impact for the people of BC, particularly in our rural and remote northern communities. So one of the things that we ended up doing is we looked at whether we could take a data-driven approach to mitigating some of the fire risks going forward. So we built a thing. This is a screenshot from what it looks like. We essentially took a bunch of different data sources and mashed them up. So we took data sources from lightning strike data, topographical maps, used a bunch of federal open data, which I have a special place in my heart for, and we took all these different data sources, put them together, and then created these 3D maps. And so what you can imagine is a firefighter putting on his goggles, or her goggles, and looking at the simulation of the spread of forest fire, right? And so now it's quite literally saving lives. And this is our premier testing out the 3D goggles and having some fun at the BC Tech Summit. So certainly a lot of very, very potentially high impact things can come from these digital service design processes. It's also, I think, worth thinking about perhaps even just more rudimentary initiatives. One that resonated a lot with me is around forms. I remember when I first started hearing about digital government, people were like, it's not just about putting forms on the internet. Well, here's an example, a couple of examples of how we've demonstrated that fairly convincingly. So previously, if you were getting divorced in BC, you were required to fill out a paper form and go into a counter at the courts and submit this form. And it was a very difficult form, and presumably this is a stressful time. And so folks were coming back up to 7 times with errors in their forms and getting sent back to fill out their form again. Obviously not the best thing for building a positive relationship between the people and the government, right? And so we went through a service design process, and rather than having those 7 forms filled out full of errors, there's now an online wizard, which you go in and you populate it, and it's a much more straightforward process. We did a similar kind of process for our medical services plan. So essentially accessing provincial health care. Previously, with the paper forms, there was an error rate of about 40%, which is appalling, obviously. And with the online experience that has been based on a service design flow, it's down to less than 1%. So I know that digital government, it's not just about putting forms online, but when we do it thoughtfully, when we do it based on citizen experience and we test with real humans, we can have really positive impacts. Essentially, what these stories although they're admittedly anecdotal, I would suggest that they create a pretty clear basis on which we can say with a great deal of confidence, governments need to become digital. They need to become digital, and they need to do it by default. There are a number of different ways that we can do that, and I want to speak about that. But really, it's absolutely worth remembering why, in the first place, governments exist, right? We exist in the public sector to deliver services to our communities, to our people. And designing for those communities is absolutely critical. My vision is that one day, governments around the world will very effectively be able to deliver services to anybody at any time through any device, right? And so if you're a person who wants to talk to a human in the government, I want those humans to be equipped with tremendously effective tools, right? So if you want to go into a Service BC counter, or you want to talk on the phone, the person who answers the phone or is at the counter supporting you, that person is going to have very easy access to information, great systems supporting them. If, however, you want to access online services, and we know that more and more Canadians do, that's going to be an excellent experience, right? I want it to be seamless. I want it to be so great that on the good days, you'll forget that it happened, right? And you can access it through Siri or Alexa or whatever chatbot you're wanting to use. And that we'll be testing and iterating and improving with the people who really use these services. To achieve that kind of vision, it seems that there are a number of different habits that we as governments need to be adopting. I'm absolutely thrilled and very proud that in the government of BC we started to adopt some of these behaviors, but like so many other governments, we have a lot of progress still to make. The big buckets of behavior that I think often resonate are the idea of designing with users, being open, being iterative. So the first that I want to highlight is this idea of being obsessed with users, right? I remember going down to Argentina and seeing that they have a lab where they'll bring Argentinians into this lab, and they every single day they're sitting there watching them test services. I remember talking to Francis Maud, the minister responsible for digital government in the UK when GDS got started, and he would test the services himself, right? He was insistent that he was going to sit there and click through these services. That kind of obsession with users is absolutely critical. All right, so we need to be obsessed with users. We need to test with real people. We need to watch them click through sites, see where they stumble, and on the basis of that, we need to iterate, right? We need to really build based on the experience of real people, real communities. The second big one is that we need to be agile, right? So in software development, obviously being agile means that we set an objective and we take a few steps towards that objective, and then before we get ahead of ourselves, we look around, we see the progress that we've made, and we assess whether or not we're on the right track. It means that we have the courage to release code early and often, and it means that we have the discipline to impose on ourselves practices and processes that are conducive to success in the agile space, right? So in the government of BC, just to tell you, sort of illustrate that this is possible, we're developing our new digital policy. The last version of it is fairly antiquated, and so we're doing this. And the team said, hey, Jaimie, we would really love to do this agile. I'm like, all right, well, tell me what you, like, sure, let's do it agile. And so my ability as the executive sponsor on this policy project to influence things, well, I get a chance every 2 weeks at the sprint review like everybody else. And so we can have the discipline of being agile in everything we do. This is not just a question of software development. This is sort of an ethos that we can impose on ourselves that seems to deliver really great results. And the last one is these governments that are effective in moving forward on digital government, they're open, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, our governments, I think we have too much ambition and too little resources to not be open, to not share code, to not develop things in the open, to not collaborate. It means that we're embracing open data. Just yesterday, we were talking about the strategy around APIs in the government of BC. We've got 10. I want everything, all of our data streams to be organized around APIs, right? This promise of government as a platform, it's an idea whose time has come, and it's one that we absolutely need to be aggressively investing in. So that's my segue to how we are starting to invest in the promise of digital government in BC. So we've developed an alpha version of a digital framework, and it's based on a few different pillars or approaches. So the first is, obviously, I've mentioned once or twice, this idea of being obsessed with citizen experiences of our services. So the first real big pillar of our approach to digital government is based on services to citizens, making sure that when we offer services to our citizens, they are simple, they're easy to use, and they're based on the needs of communities. The second is around data and information. We cannot power digital services without effective use of or management of our information. It means being a responsible data steward. It means really thinking through the different risks and opportunities associated with the data we manage. At the subnational level in Canada, we manage a great deal of very high quality, but frankly intimate data. We have healthcare data, education data. This data, it's absolute gold, and we need to protect it. Data protection is another idea whose time has come, and we need to be, in my mind, quite a bit more proactive in the way we manage it. Talked about being digital inside. When I started off talking about the definition of digital government, for me it's about adopting modern tools to deliver services that people trust. So modern tools mean that we're adopting what's out there. It means that we're being agile in the extent to which we adopt these new tools. It means being, to the extent that it's prudent and effective, it means being cloud first. It means using advanced analytics to reach insights. It means having data scientists that are coming to work every day and mashing up disparate data sets and looking for ways to optimize our processes. It means really empowering public servants. We've provided about 1,000 of our 35,000 public servants in BC with agile training. It's not enough. Every single one needs to be highly, highly skilled in agile and digital. I think gone are the days of putting digital as just an IMIT thing. This is the way that we deliver services in the modern age. And finally, this idea of being connected outside and building with communities, right? I talked about how in BC we do have this significant digital divide, like in all parts of Canada. We have this incredibly rich and diverse country where we have rural communities, and we need to be thoughtful about designing for the edges, for the people who are perhaps traditionally marginalized. We're doing a number of different key initiatives just to get ourselves started. We believe in iterating. So the sorts of things that we're doing as initial moves are aligning our funding cycle and our funding approvals with our digital principles and architectural standards. We're building out a modern policy. Our current policy, actually, it's thrilling. We've got a full-blown ban on having in-house developers, so we're going to get rid of that barrier. Modern tools, making sure that we are able to adopt modern tools in a responsible manner. DevOps, we've got a great DevOps platform, built about 150 apps off of it right now, and this is great, but scaling that and making sure that any ministry can access that environment is absolutely critical. Digital standards, as I mentioned, it's going to be very important that when we invest in new initiatives or manage the legacy portfolio, that we're doing so in alignment with a clear path forward and digital standards that resonate. And then common components. This is not something that I heard about too much at the federal level, but essentially because we are very lean, the idea of having plug and play elements that you can integrate into digital services is critical, right? So having an established pay system that you can just take a chunk of code and say, okay, now we've got a pay module built into the service. So trying to build out those different sort of common components is an important part of the approach. Really, we're getting to a place now where governments truly have demonstrated that they can do better, we can do better. And because we can do better, we absolutely must do better. What I would leave you with, though, is as we're building out digital services, as we're focusing on delivering digital frameworks for our people and delivering on the expectations of our citizens, I would urge you to take a collaborative approach. Organizations like mine, sitting right on the ground, working with real communities, these are organizations that are here to collaborate. We're here to share code. We're really excited about this. And I think that this is a critical way of rising to the expectations of the digital age. There's a tremendous opportunity to do that with partners, with governments like mine, and most importantly, with communities. I think that's about it for time. I've got time for maybe one question if there's a question from the crowd. But otherwise, I'm here for the next 3 days, and I would be really thrilled to talk about opportunities for working together. Do we want to do one question? Hey, Phil.
Hi, Jaimie. Thanks very I'm involved in a shop that does agile. And your last comment about a full-on ban on developers, can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. And obviously in the lab, we've got an exemption. No, it's a lot of times the policy approaches that we adopt as governments, we don't update them as quickly as we should. And so we've got a legacy policy environment where we've got, it's the Core Policy and Procedures Manual of the Government of British Columbia, Chapter 12 relates to IM and IT. And I think back in the day, 20 or so years ago when it was developed, the idea was that developers should stay in the community and we should outsource. It would seem today that that is not a very prudent approach. And so we're changing that. Okay, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you, your interest in BC. It's a beautiful place, and I'm very excited to collaborate with you all going forward. Thank you.